Clear to the president that the United States needs to be involved in this rebuilding effort to ensure stability in the region for all people. But that does not mean boots on the ground in Gaza. This is something that the Biden administration allegedly tried to do for 3.5 years. I think you all should go back and ask some of those Biden administration officials what they even tried to do. And then when I got to the podium, I realized the president is delivering on everything he said he was going to do, which makes my job as his spokeswoman easy, because I'm not working for a politician who's lying.
What reporters didn't know when they walked into that press room was that Karoline Leavitt had been preparing for this moment her entire career. The tension was palpable as the White House press briefing room transformed into a battlefield that day. Cameras were positioned strategically, microphones carefully placed, and notebooks ready as journalists from every major network filed in with one clear mission: corner the White House press secretary about Dan Bongino's controversial FBI appointment. You could feel the electricity in the air. The press corps arrived with their questions meticulously crafted, confident they had the perfect trap set. Major networks had dispatched their veteran political correspondents specifically for this confrontation. They were armed and ready with what they believed was an irrefutable argument. How could someone without current FBI experience possibly be qualified for such a critical leadership position? CNN's political correspondent led the initial assault, barely concealing his satisfaction as he demanded answers. The president previously assured the American people that the FBI deputy director would be a current special agent with relevant experience.
In the engagement with Putin and the Russians, the president has made it clear always that both sides need to talk equally to bring both sides to the table to negotiate a deal. And
nobody knows more about trade than me.
Nobody knows the system better than me. Nobody knows the banking industry better than me.
Nobody knows more about environmental impact statements.
If I did it, you would be standing up in that chair shouting at me, and you know what I'd do? I'd say, you got me.
Can you explain this complete reversal with the Bongino appointment? His smug expression said it all. He thought he had delivered a knockout question that would leave Leavitt scrambling. But instead of becoming defensive or flustered, Leavitt did something the press room wasn't expecting. She leaned forward slightly, made direct eye contact with the CNN reporter, and completely flipped their narrative with a simple question of her own. "Before I address that," she said calmly, "I'm curious, has anyone in this room actually listened to Dan Bongino speak about the corruption he witnessed inside the FBI during his time in law enforcement?" No, the silence that followed was deafening. Reporters glanced at each other nervously. These so-called experts who had arrived to grill her about Bongino's qualifications hadn't even done their basic homework on the very man they were questioning. They'd prepared their gotcha questions without understanding his extensive background or specific expertise. An MSNBC correspondent tried to regain control, pressing Leavitt on whether the appointment undermined FBI institutional knowledge. That's when Leavitt delivered her first real knockout blow. "You're assuming the FBI gets to decide who runs this country," she said, her voice steady but resolute. "Let me remind you, the president does. The American people elected President Trump precisely because they're tired of unaccountable bureaucracies that protect themselves instead of serving the public." The reporters' faces visibly changed as they realized their carefully planned ambush was unraveling before their eyes. Leavitt wasn't just defending the appointment, she was challenging their entire premise about who should hold power in Washington.
If he says it, then I'll go with it, and if he wants to be a dictator, then so be it.
impacted the delay on the tariffs was the president of Mexico committing to putting 10,000 permanent soldiers on the U.S.-Mexican border.
How has your life changed over the last 3 weeks?
It's incredible, and we are very, very busy. The life is...
Press corps had arrived expecting to intimidate a young press secretary. Instead, they found themselves facing someone who understood their tactics better than they did. What became clear to viewers watching this exchange was how thoroughly Leavitt had prepared for this showdown. While the press had been crafting their attack lines, she had been studying their patterns, anticipating exactly which angles they would pursue, and preparing devastating counterpoints that exposed their lack of genuine research. When a Washington Post reporter attempted to suggest that Bongino's appointment was unprecedented, Leavitt was ready with specific historical examples of previous FBI directors who came from outside the bureau. When others tried suggesting the appointment was politically motivated, she calmly reminded them of the documented political bias that had infected the FBI's upper echelons in recent years. The room shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The confident expressions that had dominated their faces when they entered were now replaced with uncertainty and frustration. administration. Some reporters were frantically scratching out prepared questions, realizing their planned angles of attack had been neutralized before they could even deploy them.
It means no more funding for transgenderism and wokeness across our federal bureaucracy and agencies.
The family, we ran 20 hours a day, every single day, no sleep, no nonsense, event after event, interview after event. I mean, there was nothing more as a family we could have done, and to have the victory that we had again.
We'll take a look at TikTok.
We're looking at TikTok. We may be banning TikTok.
We're not doing anything with TikTok.
Joe Biden is responsible for banning TikTok.
As the reporters shifted in their seats, a strange tension filled the room. The hunters had suddenly become the hunted. What started as a routine press briefing where journalists expected to corner Karoline Leavitt had transformed into something entirely different. A masterclass in exposing media hypocrisy. Leavitt's eyes scanned the room with calm precision. These weren't just random questions about Bongino's qualifications anymore. This was about years of selective outrage, and she was ready to pull back the curtain. "Let me ask you all something," Leavitt said, her voice steady but piercing. Where exactly was this passionate concern for FBI institutional expertise when James Comey was leaking classified information to the press? Where was your outrage when Peter Strzok and Lisa Page were texting about their insurance policy against a democratically elected president? The silence that followed was deafening. Some reporters began frantically flipping through their notebooks, suddenly very interested in their own handwriting. A Washington Post reporter, visibly uncomfortable with the direction this was heading, attempted to regain control. "That's not what we're talking about today," he interjected, hoping to redirect the conversation back to Bongino. Leavitt didn't miss a beat. "Oh, but it is," she fired back, her response cutting through the room like a knife. The reporter's attempt to dismiss the comparison had only given her more ammunition. The American people have seen what happens when so-called institutional experts run unchecked, she continued, her words met with nervous murmurs throughout the press room. They've witnessed how those same institutions can be weaponized against political opponents. Camera operators zoomed in on reporters' faces as they exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't in their playbook. They'd arrived with questions designed to paint the administration as reckless and unprepared, but instead found themselves defending their own journalistic integrity, or lack thereof. Let's be honest about what's happening here. Leavitt continued, gaining momentum. The same reporters sitting in this room who now clutched their pearls about FBI institutional expertise were mysteriously silent, or worse, actively cheering, when that same expertise was deployed against President Trump. The press corps squirmed visibly. Journalists who moments ago had been confidently holding up their hands to ask the next gotcha question were now avoiding eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their shoelaces or the ceiling tiles. One brave soul from a major network tried regaining control, suggesting that replacing career officials was creating chaos within federal agencies. Leavitt's response was immediate and devastating. "That's not chaos, that's leadership." The statement hung in the air, impossible to dismiss. She methodically continued dismantling their narrative, pointing out how the media's newfound respect for FBI leadership conveniently appeared only when it aligned with their political preferences. The hypocrisy was laid bare for all to see. Cameras panned across the room, capturing reporters who were clearly not used to having their motives questioned so directly. They had arrived as confident inquisitors, but were rapidly discovering what it felt like to be on the receiving end of uncomfortable questions. The American people deserve better than selective outrage, Leavitt stated firmly. They deserve a media that holds every administration to the same standard, not just the ones they disagree with politically.
And then when I got to the podium, I realized the president is delivering on everything he said he was going to do, which makes my job as his spokeswoman easy because I'm not working for a politician who's lying.
Create havoc. These are bad people. I know everything they're doing. I know every move they make. I get it. It's tougher. I think it's probably, in many ways, it's tougher on my family than it is in me. But the reason she couldn't stand me is that she always wanted to go to war with people. I don't want to go to war. She wanted to stay in Syria. I took them out.
The journalists' expressions told the whole story. They'd expected to control this narrative, to frame the discussion on their terms. Instead, they found themselves exposed, their double standards highlighted in real time for the entire nation to see. The journalists thought energy policy would be safer ground to attack the administration, but they had no idea what was coming. Did you know American companies paid foreign governments over $370 billion in taxes last year, while foreign corporations doing business here paid just $57 billion? That shocking imbalance was about to become the centerpiece of Leavitt's most devastating takedown yet. Sensing that the FBI topic had become a minefield, reporters quickly shifted their strategy to questioning Trump's economic plans. A Washington Post journalist took the bait first, challenging the administration's proposed tariff policies with the familiar warning about increased consumer costs. But Leavitt was more than prepared. Last year alone, U.S. companies paid over $370 billion in taxes to foreign governments. Meanwhile, foreign corporations doing business here paid us just $57 billion. That's not reciprocal. That's a scam, she fired back, leaving the reporter visibly stunned by the stark numbers. When another journalist tried suggesting that economic experts unanimously opposed Trump's trade approach, Leavitt didn't miss a beat. We heard the same argument when President Trump first imposed tariffs on China, and yet what happened? The economy thrived, supply chains adapted, and American manufacturing saw a resurgence. She paused before delivering the knockout punch. The same analysts who claimed Biden's massive spending wouldn't cause inflation are now suddenly concerned about tariffs. Forgive me if we're not taking their advice. The room's atmosphere shifted noticeably as Leavitt moved from defense to offense on energy policy. When President Trump was in office, we were the #1 energy producer in the world. Gas prices were low, manufacturing was booming, families weren't choosing between filling their tank or buying groceries, she stated, her voice steady but forceful. A Reuters correspondent tried interrupting, suggesting the administration's energy plans might damage climate initiatives, but Leavitt cut him off with surgical precision.
This is something that the Biden administration allegedly tried to do for 3.5 years. I think you all should go back and ask some of those Biden administration officials what they even tried to do.
The 14th Amendment, though, says that, quote, all persons born in the United States are citizens. Can you get around the 14th Amendment with an executive action?
We're gonna have to get a change. I said, and they got me. I said, I want to wear it on stage. When they said I looked thinner.
What's reckless is shutting down American energy production while begging OPEC and hostile nations for oil, she countered, highlighting the contradiction that the press had conveniently overlooked for years. Each time reporters thought they'd found a vulnerability in Trump's policy agenda, Leavitt demonstrated a complete command of the details that left them scrambling. When a journalist from The Hill attempted to characterize Trump's government efficiency plans as reckless firing sprees, Leavitt calmly explained the administration's philosophy. The government should be held to the same standard as the private sector, she stated matter-of-factly. If employees aren't delivering results, they shouldn't remain on the payroll. That's not radical. It's common sense accountability that Washington has lacked for decades. Even national security wasn't off limits. When challenged about Trump's military leadership appointments, Leavitt responded with unexpected clarity. The United States military deserves leadership that earns the trust of our warfighters, not leadership that plays DC politics. She continued, the president believes in a military that is strong, effective, and focused on defending America first. What became increasingly apparent throughout the briefing was how thoroughly prepared Leavitt was for every angle of attack. While journalists entered with predetermined talking points, she countered with specific facts and figures that exposed their superficial understanding of complex policy issues. More importantly, she highlighted the media's own failure to scrutinize the previous administration's shortcomings with the same fervor they now applied to Trump's plans. Just when the journalists thought they'd regained control with accusations of press hostility, Leavitt's response, finally, a question worth answering, changed everything. The Atlantic reporter had handed her the perfect opportunity, and everyone in that press room was about to witness a takedown so devastating that not a single reporter would dare speak when she finished. The atmosphere shifted instantly as Leavitt leaned forward, her posture changing from defensive to commanding. This wasn't just another response. This was the moment she'd been waiting for to address the elephant in the room, the media's own credibility crisis. Finally, a question worth answering, she began, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The reporters who moments earlier had been scribbling notes and preparing follow-ups froze. Something in her tone told them this wouldn't be the standard White House dodge they were accustomed to. Leavitt proceeded to methodically dismantle years of media narratives that had shaped public perception.
Clear to the president that the United States needs to be involved in this rebuilding effort to ensure stability in the region for all people. But that does not mean boots on the ground in Gaza.
Perform sex change operation and send them back home.
Not Jimmy anymore, it's Tamara, but I will.
I know nothing about QAnon. I know nothing about it. I know nothing about the indictment. I know nothing about WikiLeaks.
I have no idea who these women are.
The Russia collusion story that dominated headlines for years despite ultimately falling apart. The Hunter Biden laptop that major outlets dismissed as Russian disinformation before quietly acknowledging its authenticity after the election. Each example landed like a body blow to the assembled press corps. When a CNN correspondent attempted to interrupt, suggesting the administration was simply refusing accountability, Leavitt didn't miss a beat. No, she countered firmly. I'm saying this administration refuses to be manipulated. The distinction hung in the air as cameras captured the reporter sinking back into their seat. But Leavitt was just getting started. She continued her systematic dismantling of the press's pretense of objectivity. You didn't care when FBI sources leaked false information about Trump, she stated, her gaze sweeping across the room as if challenging anyone to deny it. Not a single reporter met her eyes. The most powerful moment came when she delivered her unequivocal verdict on the fractured relationship between the administration and the media. The truth is, the relationship between this White House and the press isn't broken because of us. It's broken because of you. For perhaps the first time in recent White House press history, the room fell completely silent. No rapid-fire follow-ups, no shouted questions, not even the usual rustling of papers or tapping of keyboards. Just silence, the kind that speaks volumes about a power dynamic fundamentally altered. Reporters who had entered that room confident in their moral authority to question the administration now sat uncomfortably confronted with their own failures. Some shifted in their seats, others tapped their pens nervously against notepads, but none dared to challenge Leavitt's assessment. They had been transformed from interrogators to the interrogated in the span of 5 minutes. In her final moments at the podium, Leavitt delivered a challenge that hung in the air. If you want respect, start earning it. The statement wasn't delivered with anger or theatrics, just the steady conviction of someone laying out terms for a relationship reset. With perfect timing that demonstrated complete control of the situation, Leavitt gave a subtle nod to her staff, gathered her materials, and stepped away from the podium. There was no dramatic exit, no slamming of doors, just the confident stride of someone who had accomplished exactly what she set out to do.